The monster catching genre has been around for quite some time, with one of the earliest games being Dragon Quest V, released in 1992. Though most people are much more familiar with Pokemon, which saw a very successful launch a few years later in Japan in 1996. Since then, other developers have tried to capture their own lightning in a bottle with only marginal success. Even series like Kingdom Hearts has taken a crack at the genre in the past. Final Fantasy, while late to the party, has dabbled in the genre a little before this point. Final Fantasy XIII-2 had monster catching as one of its major features, allowing you to fight alongside them. Before that, Final Fantasy X had a monster capture mechanic known as the Monster Arena, though it only allowed you to fight the monsters you've captured, not fight alongside them. At some point, someone at Square Enix thought, hey, third time's the charm. Enter World of Final Fantasy, a game that promises to allow you to capture and fight alongside monsters from a multitude of Final Fantasy games. Characters and settings from Final Fantasy pervade the story, and the game makes no allusions to being strictly for fans. So how does this game stack up compared to others within its genre? And more importantly, is the game any good? We'll answer these questions and more in this review of World of Final Fantasy. If you couldn't guess just by the intro, World of Final Fantasy is an RPG created by Square Enix with a monster capture focus. It follows the two protagonists, Rain and Lon, as they adventure through the realm of Grimoire. Within Grimoire are numerous kinds of cities, citizens, and locales that throw back to various Final Fantasy games, and with the game's many monsters, it's within these aspects that World of Final Fantasy caters to fans of the series. If you're not a die-hard fan or you haven't played a large number of Final Fantasy games, you may find yourself lost from time to time, or worse, uninvested in the game world. World of Final Fantasy plays much like other games in the genre, in that you have to fight other monsters to level up the ones you already have. One thing that makes World of Final Fantasy unique compared to other games within its genre is that you can have multiple monsters out in the field due to the game's stacking mechanic. Each monster in the game has a size, small, medium, or large, and you stack them under or onto the protagonist and their stats combine with your own. In this sense, you may have a total of 4 monsters and the 2 protagonists out on the field, but they function like only 2 units. The protagonists have the ability to switch between 2 forms, Lilican and Giant. Both forms have stat configurations you can customize, and what form you enter combat with depends on what you are in the world. When Rain and Lon are Lilican, they're considered medium-sized, and so can stack atop large-sized monsters with a small-sized monster perched atop their heads. As Giants, they're considered large-sized, and so can stack a medium and small-sized monster atop their heads. There's 2 general strategies to stacking I've noticed. You focus on similar monsters to have access to more powerful spells and abilities, which upgrade when monsters have the same abilities, or you aim for versatility so you can hit more enemy weaknesses. However you choose to stack, you also share the elemental weaknesses and strengths of the monsters in your stack, so the game is considerably deeper in this aspect than it seems from the beginning, and gets deeper the more monsters you capture and have access to. Actually capturing monsters is considerably different compared to other games within the genre. For example, while Pokemon requires you to use Pokeballs to capture monsters, and Dragon Quest V relies on a random number generator to choose if monsters offer to join you after a battle, World of Final Fantasy gives you the means to capture a monster the first time you meet it, and it's up to you to figure out how to weaken them for capture. Just weakening the monster isn't enough though. You often have to do something special to put them into a state in which you can capture them. In order to figure these things out, the game gives you access to the Libra spell fairly early on, a legacy Final Fantasy spell that does much the same then as it does now. It gives you information on the enemy. For many monsters, this is as simple as attacking them with their elemental weakness, a physical attack, or a critical hit. Others might require you to heal them, or that they be the last monster standing. Once in this state, you can attempt to capture them as many times as you need to. So while some may be a challenge to capture, so long as you have enough patience, you'll inevitably capture your target. Every time a monster levels, they get a skill point that can be invested into their own grid. These usually only give you stat boosts, but some may be various abilities or spells. Once you've acquired them, if the monster's in your stack, you have access to them. As stated before, if monsters in your stack all have similar spells and abilities, those spells and abilities usually upgrade to a stronger version. The game also has a sort of summon mechanic in the form of champion medals, created in the image of various Final Fantasy protagonists and sometimes antagonists. You can only equip 3 at a time, and they have a different kind of meter to summon them with that can only be filled by damaging enemies and taking damage yourself. These attacks are usually pretty powerful and tend to offer buffs to the party, and comes with a cool cinematic. For the most part, these are all the things that you need to know about combat. World of Final Fantasy has a few unique aspects that set it apart from its peers, but also doesn't stray too far away from concepts that have been in the genre for a long time. The stacking system and the strategies they force you to consider are probably the deepest aspects of the combat, and how you stack and what you use to stack can make or break you. In a game with a notable difficulty curve, it's good to understand and master these aspects. The rest of the game itself is simple in comparison. You follow the story of the two sibling protagonists, do some side quests along the way for extra items and gil to help you progress, and bam, you're done. There's plenty of things to do to keep you busy, but as you might expect from a game where the deepest aspect is combat strategies, pretty much all of them involve fighting. The aesthetics of World of Final Fantasy look great. The developers did a solid job of bringing the world to life, and it's colorful and believable. My only issue I had with the game in terms of aesthetics were the Lilican. I can't decide if their implementation is lazy, pure genius, or both, because the Lilican are minimalist in nature. Even the game's various champions, major Final Fantasy protagonists you'll encounter as you play throughout the game, have this sort of cute, tiny form. The cynical reviewer in me says it was done to save on the art budget for the game, but the optimistic reviewer in me says that they were probably created to help differentiate between the world of Grimoire and the world the protagonist came from. As for the music, I'm not sure what to say here. A lot of the music is unique to the world of Final Fantasy, but there's a number of tracks that are arrangements of music from other Final Fantasy games. I wasn't compelled to turn off the game music and listen to my own, so I'd say that's a positive at least. Part of this is probably because the game allows you to choose what music to listen to during combat, and randomizing it has hilarious results, especially when serious battle music plays during combat against unintimidating enemies. As much as I wanted to love World of Final Fantasy, there's a number of flaws that I want to address here. For starters, the game's story is straightforward and boring, with no real twists that you can't guess over the entirety of the game. In fact, the game practically puts the game's only big twist right in your lap, practically within the first hour of gameplay. I could forgive this, because I've played better games with worse stories, if only the game's characters weren't so annoying to listen to. While the voice acting is done well here, there are aspects written into the characters themselves that made me dread the game's many cutscenes. One example of this is Tama, a character that permanently accompanies the protagonist and assists them. Just have a listen to a little of how Tama speaks in order to get an idea of what I mean.
The one who does it. That's the right! I have the power to rewind time a little, and then to whisk you to safety. Although, it costs me a life to do it, so I hope you don't mind if I rest for a little the while afterwards.
A life?
You might not believe it, but I've actually got multiple lives. Back there, I had to sacrifice one of those lives to turn back time and to save you. You see, this girl with a ribbon that showed up in my dreams, she's the one who taught me how to...
It's like if someone decided that they loved the verbal tick that Starfire from Teen Titans possessed, but wanted to make an entire character based around that. What you had to endure of Tama was just a handful of seconds of gameplay. I had to suffer hour upon hour of Tama's constant verbal tics just to have enough footage for this review. Almost as bad as Tama were the protagonists themselves. Typically you want to have protagonists that you can relate to, or at a bare minimum, empathize with. I struggled with every fiber of my being to like either Rain or Lon, but both of them are usually unsufferable at the best of times. Lon fits that sort of idiot savant trope, struggling with simple words and mannerisms one moment, but then praised for his skills the next. Rain, the sister, struggles to keep up with Lon most of the time, trying to keep him in line or clean up his messes. She's constantly either upset with Lon or insulting him, and she's that sort of know-it-all, I can hang with the boys and I should because they're all a mess sort of trope that you might attribute to a character like, say, Hermione Granger of Harry Potter fame, or Bulma from Dragon Ball. The difference is that those two characters are arguably better written, and the focus of their characters isn't their condescension like Rain's is. To be fair to the game, these things did level out some after the first 5 or 6 hours, but still occurred regularly enough to be annoying. As I said before, the way these characters were portrayed and voiced, through no fault of the voice actors, who I assume were held at gunpoint to voice these lines, I began to dread continuing the story because it stole me away from the game's moderately fun combat and forced me to endure usually 5+ minute long cutscenes where these characters spout exposition. If I'm ever asked by someone what I think is the best example of how to portray characters in a way that will completely put off people playing the game, I will enthusiastically point to the characters of World of Final Fantasy. Finally, moving away from the game's characters, next on the chopping block was how the first 5 or 6 hours of the game were treated as a tutorial. The game dumps a lot of information on you all at once, and to do this, it almost always completely halts the game on numerous occasions. It puts text boxes in front of you to sift through, and since it's tough to tell what will be important, you feel compelled to read each and every one of them. When it doesn't want to give you a text box, it often throws you into random cutscenes that occur with no warning. For example, I wanted to go shop for items, but when I quick traveled to the area with the shop, it gave me a lengthy cutscene where I arrived, for no good reason and with no warning otherwise, in the game's monster arena. The difficulty curve is very inconsistent. Bosses have a tendency to be unforgiving without the right preparations, unleashing powerful moves to take away large chunks of HP, thus requiring a heavy grind to compensate. Because you have to grind, minor enemies aren't that much of a challenge after the first few hours, often dying in one hit. Because of the Pokemon-like capture mechanics, where the lower the HP is, the easier monster is to capture when in its capture state, this sometimes makes capturing monsters a bit of a challenge. The monsters in this game are also often the kind that I don't recognize. Many seem to have been made specifically for the game, while others are legitimate monsters from Final Fantasy games. Some of these veteran monsters are obvious, like Chocobos, Flans, and Behemoth, but because of the art style, others aren't as easy to recognize at a glance. Knack, for example, are canine-looking monsters that can be found in Final Fantasy V, but were given an elemental facelift and so aren't so easy to recognize just looking at them. I feel like there were plenty of monsters in 15 mainline games and countless spin-offs that they shouldn't have had to struggle so much in a game that is literally all about Final Fantasy monsters, but maybe I'm just being nitpicky. Finally, the game's combat moves extremely slowly without the use of the game's fast-forward feature. There's a button to press, or hold down depending on your settings, that speeds up the game's combat. It seems redundant when all they needed to do was have the turn times to get the same effect. Then they could have offered the fast forward feature to make combat even faster. It would have made the game's combat a little less of a slog and a little less grindy for sure, but at the very least they didn't force you to experience the combat as originally intended. World of Final Fantasy's strongest points are its combat and nostalgia. There's more depth to the combat than it seems at first glance, and the way the game portrays characters and locations from the series is very nostalgic. The game's summons, the champion medals, are some of the best looking cutscenes in the game, sad to say. The stories and characters, however, are its weakest points, and it's a very linear experience all around. It's difficult to recommend this game to anyone but the most die-hard of Final Fantasy fans, and even within that group, the game will still only appeal to fans of the monster-catching genre due to its laser focus on that aspect. Additionally, the game is $40, but recently was offered on sale for $20, which is a better price overall. I can't recommend this game at full price, not when you can spend $10 more and get the superior Final Fantasy XV on PC, complete with all the DLC and amazing optimizations. We've already reviewed Final Fantasy XV for PC, so definitely check it out if you're interested. I'm glad I captured your attention today. If you want more, check me out on social media and Twitch, links can be found in the description below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next review.